Hola a todos, bienvenidos al podcast El Regalo de Vivir. Yo soy su host, Valeria Reyes, y estoy súper contenta porque tengo el privilegio y el honor de entrevistar a Gareth de Misk'i Taki. Lleva mucho tiempo trabajando tanto en su música, porque él es músico y pueden escuchar su música en Spotify, luego lo voy a poner aquí. Gareth, pues, vino de visita acá a San Diego, él vive en Perú y estoy súper contenta de tener el placer de entrevistarlo. Thank you so much, Gareth. This is going to be my first interview in English, so I'm excited. Please, just so you know, English is not my first language, so if at any moment you are confused or you need clarification or whatever I meant to say, just feel free to tell me, and I'll do my best to explain whatever I'm trying to say. And for those of you who don't know you, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Gareth. Some people know me as Misk'i Taki, which is an artistic name given to me, which I decided to use for recording some years ago. And a little bit about me.
Where are you from, for example?
Originally.
I mean, yeah, why not?
Originally, I come from a small island off the coast of Europe called Great Britain, and for the last 25, nearly 30 years, I've been living in different countries of the world. Most recently, the last 10 years in Peru.
How did you end up being in Peru?
Mm-hmm. I followed the inspiration to visit the Peruvian jungle after meeting a man who originated from the Peruvian jungle. I met him on my travels, and it became apparent to me that this was something in this part of the world that I hadn't experienced before.
How long was that?
How long ago?
Yeah, how long ago?
This was 15 years ago.
Okay, so you've been living in Peru for a long time.
Yeah, I've been visiting Peru off and on and living in Peru more permanently for the last 10 years.
Wonderful. And how did Misk'i Taki begin? The journey with the music? And I don't know if you were doing different music before Misk'i Taki and then it arose later on in life. Could you tell us a bit more about your journey?
Misk'i Taki is a character. Misk'i Taki is simply a name given to me by this man that became my teacher for maybe 5-6 years. One night he gave me the name Misk'i Taki. After maybe 3 years in apprenticeship with him, he leaned over to me and said, "You are known as Misk'i Taki." And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "This is the man that sings sweetly." I thought, "That's very nice of you, thank you very much." And I looked into it a bit later, and Misk'i Taki is also the name of a Peruvian folk TV channel or something like this. So it got a little confusing for a while. So Misk'i Taki is this independent character. It's one that I have identified with sometimes and not identified with other times. He's one of many names which we're given in this life.
Do you believe, sorry for interrupting, but do you believe that people connect with Misk'i Taki more in terms of the medicine music, or do you have other characters or other ways to refer to as your artistic name, perhaps?
Misk'i Taki is the only one that I'm known as in this way. I don't record or produce music under my own name. This was, again, almost by accident. When they came to record the first album was around about the time when I was wondering what to put the album out as, what the name of the album was to be, what to put it out, which name to put it out under, my name or this, because we know there are sometimes considerations to take into play. And I chose the name Misk'i Taki to put the first album out under, and it stuck artistically. And it's very difficult once you've chosen a name to change it back, because everything is already licensed under different names. People start to become familiar. So I did wonder about changing it back at different points, but it would have been more complicated. So this is one thing that people could relate to through that. Personally, I identify as myself. When I create music and when I come to publish it, it simply becomes published under the name of Misk'i Taki. So this is the one side of it. The musical journey for me was, I don't remember a time of my life where music wasn't present. I remember it from being a very small child. I remember being around my parents, who were both musical in many different forms. I remember the music in the churches growing up. I was encouraged to be in choirs from a very young age, to learn instruments, things like this. And music was always my, I say, inspiration and safe place. It was always comfort in music for me. And not just music with lyrics, but music, pure music. So I found that it was able to bring a lot of comfort, bring a lot of inspiration, bring a lot of joy, depending on which emotion was there. It was present in music. There's a whole spectrum of music for different things. And my inspiration to become a musician wasn't really to become a musician. It was to find a way to be able to express my interior world to the outside. And primarily that was through writing for me. So I would write an awful lot when I was an adolescent, when I was a teenager. A lot of stories, poetry, which I wanted to translate into song. And following the theme and the inspiration of many of my favorite artists of those days. So it was necessary for me to learn an instrument in order to be able to put the two parts together. So I taught myself the guitar, which wasn't one of the instruments I was taught in my education. And I pursued that for some years to become a musician. And then around about the age of 20, I realized that it wasn't going in the direction I would have wished it to go. The environments I was playing in weren't conducive to me. The response from audiences wasn't necessarily how I would like it to be. And I also realized I wasn't going to become massively famous. So I kind of stopped playing music for quite a long time. It wasn't to do with the not becoming famous. It was more to do with the fact that I didn't really feel that it was representative of what I wanted to achieve through it.
And then you came back and...
Well, the music was always in me. And then it started to want to come back out again a few years later, but in a different form. It was unexpected, but I'm very grateful that it took place. And again, in this particular path of life of mine, I've found much inspiration through men and women that are creating music with a different intention and with a different purpose. So we find that in the field of music, so much music is about just displaying who somebody is or expressing an emotion. And for me, the inspiration when I was growing up was always in the lyricism, always in the poetry, always in the purest essence of it. And I find that there are many people who are also inspired to do the same.
But how did you end up starting with medicine music? Was it a few years ago?
No, it was part of the exposure of being able to hear a different aspect of music. Many people, when they think of medicine music, what we hear conventionally as music doesn't speak of the same themes often. It does, but maybe we speak of the same emotions, but we don't necessarily relate to them in the same way. So there's a vibration in some healing music that is very resonant. And it's not necessarily the most commercial music. The most commercial music in the world is the one that manipulates emotion, that distracts people from their emotions, that doesn't necessarily uplift or inspire. It's the one that simply is there, is present. We listen to the radio. Are there many messages in the songs that are coherent, that are in support of life? Or are they simply just more distractive? Whereas I think when I was first exposed to what we know as medicine music or healing music, then there are different themes, or there are themes being expressed in different ways. And I think that's what unlocked in me is these are people speaking a language that I also wanted to be able to This was the language that I wanted to speak originally with music. And music is a language. It's just a matter of learning or bringing that language out. It's very much tied to the heart. It's very much tied to the essence of who somebody is. And I think that in conjunction with the medicine, in conjunction with the hearing some of the genre of medicine music, that was able to allow me to find a voice for my own essence.
Do you feel that somebody has to be open for the music medicine to work, or to have I feel like if you have a certain frequency, right, and you're exposed to this kind of music, but then if you're not on that frequency level, or does it have another way to work on people?
I think by exposure, you have to, I mean, if you were to hear it, then you would have to be relatively open to continue to listen to it. Otherwise, you would simply change the channel, like change the track. This isn't my type of music. You know, this is one of the things that we find growing up. People identify with what is their kind of music, what their kind of person is. And anything outside of that, it can tend to be a little bit hard to connect with. Like, I like rock, or I like reggae, or I like, this, that, or the other. Whereas really, I think to be open to all forms of music is a great place to begin. But I definitely think a certain amount of exposure to that allows the receptivity, because it's maybe not what people are used to. Which is why there are so many avenues of entry into it, and there's so many ways that the vibrational music works. Like, someone might listen to, let's say, they might listen to, hard rock or classical music when they're at home in their own space. When they go to a yoga class, they might be exposed to mantras, things like this, which then they might listen to when they're there, and then they might start incorporating into their home life when they realize that there's a form of music that relaxes them, that allows them to drop into themselves a little bit more, to meditate. It doesn't always have to be something with a big beat that drives us forward. So there's different ways and avenues that people can come into it.
Connecting the music with ancestral medicine, what has been your experience with both, and separately with ancestral medicine, such as ayahuasca? And I don't know if you work with other types of ancestral medicines.
Well, first of all, I recognize ancestral medicine. This concept is speaking to a global ancestry. What we consider to be medicine is that of the natural world. So, to cycle back, what would be the origins of expression within certain spaces? The origin of expression would be to sing, to chant, to provide rhythm. And we seem to find that all of these go together with what we consider to be ancestral medicines today. There's a certain way of creating and holding a space in that way. In the same way that we might also listen to the music and the vibration of nature. In certain spaces, nature is never silent also. So there's music always there as well, which is helping to create a space. So this would be what I would think, how I can see how it works in the different traditions that I've looked into, is that there's a science and there's a technology that goes hand in hand with the plant medicines, and goes hand in hand with that and music.
And with the ancestral medicine, what has been your experience?
Again, we'd look at that as a global thing. And the ancestral medicines of South America, I would say around about probably 15 years ago, when I met them in South America. There are other ancestral medicines, that are not so spoken about. There are ancestral medicines in Africa, in Europe, in North America, South America, in Asia, all across the world. So I can't claim to have any knowledge of all of them. But, we grew up in my part of Europe knowing that there was a tradition of the knowledge of plants. And the ancestral medicines that people speak about today, some of the more high-profile ones that you could say, like ayahuasca, like you mentioned, this is all in the field of herbalism, natural herbalism, which is something that the people certainly understand from my part of the world 100 years, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago would have known what was in their environment to be used for different things. They didn't necessarily have a pharmacy on the corner, a CVS or a Rite Aid or something like this. They didn't necessarily have a doctor to go to that was going to be able to prescribe something. It's okay. Well, we have a cold here, or what in our environment is good for a cold. We have somebody that has just given birth. What can we give to that person to enable them to recuperate their body, to body well? And these plants would often operate on varying degrees of subtlety. So I was aware of this in my own environment from early teenage years. I was aware of this in a global environment from my middle teenage years, from my readings, from my exposure to different traditions and cultures. If we dig into the traditions and cultures, then we find that within that there's a whole natural way of being, which is ancestral. Nowadays we're in a process of reclamation of the ancestral, because in the last short period of human history there's been a little bit of a division between let's say the natural world and the way that humans are cohabiting in this world, and there's a movement back to I hope to a more natural and holistic way of being.
And I can sense that when I ask you about, at least for ayahuasca, I sense that you like to not maybe keep it more broad. Is that what I'm sensing? For example, if I ask you like ancestral medicines, you think about all the medicines, not all the ancestral aspects of it, not just like connect necessarily ayahuasca with the only ancestral medicines. That there are thousands of different ways to connect with the plants, because that's the medicine, the plant. And but in this case, when we talk about ayahuasca, we perhaps give it more attention because it produces certain chemical substance in our body and our brain that allows us to connect with other realities and have other different sensations that we normally don't have in the human experience. Right? Is that what I'm sensing, or am I?
Well, it's not that we don't have them in the human experience. It's the human experience, I believe, has been normalized to a point in which we only recognize a certain spectrum of experience. In the whole spectrum of human experience, I believe there is a very rich and varied tradition of connection with spirit, mysticism, and inherent wisdom, which we don't speak about. We don't speak about our connection to this. We don't speak about our connection to the divine, unless it's in a religious context. If we have a mystical experience, we worry that people are going to think we're crazy. You know, we hear things, we see things, we suddenly feel a unity with everything. Well, that's not normal, is it? We're not supposed to feel like that. But we look through all of the traditions of history, and with and without plant medicine, people have been having these kind of experiences. But they've been pushed to one side in my understanding. And regarding to when I hear the word ayahuasca, how it makes me feel with the cameras and things like this is, I know there's a lot of sensationalism around certain plant medicines. I also know there's still a long way to go until the plant medicines are honored and respected for being what they are, which is plant medicines or sacred plants, especially in some cultures where it's very easy to put them into the category of this plant is not allowed, this plant is not sanctioned, this plant is okay, this one is not. So it automatically closes me up a little bit, because I recognize that this is a very delicate topic. And when I speak to ancestral medicines and I speak in a greater context, it's largely because if we take a broader context and we see that natural herbalism is part of our human history, as part of our human ancestry, then it allows us to take into scope all of the wisdom that we have forgotten about over the last few hundred years, shall we say.
I know, I understand that this is a difficult topic, and if you go on YouTube and you Google ayahuasca and you find all the different experiences that people have had, and sometimes they have horrible experiences, but it's creating this over-sensationalized, is that a word? Over-sensationalized?
Sensationalized, yeah.
Sensationalized, and almost people may think that this is a solution for all of their problems, or maybe the cause of all of their problems. And because I've heard people have gone through difficult periods of their lives after going through a ceremony. But I was very curious about how was your experience with it? If you can talk to someone who has never done it,
Mm-hmm.
or it's watching this video or hearing this podcast, and they have no previous experience with any medicine, and they hear that somebody's coming to town or they were recommended by someone, what could be your advice for those people who have a desire to feel better?
Yeah, well, this way of working can open up many things that we don't see. Sometimes we know what it is that we might be looking for, and sometimes we don't know. So the first thing will be to be honest as to why you're interested, and do some research. Again, like, to be careful that you're well resourced internally and externally to be able to support that kind of work, deep inner work, recognizing there is quite potentially a step out of the comfort zone. And a good friend of mine, he said, when he started on this path, he didn't realize anything needed to be healed. Everything seemed quite good. Maybe quite inquisitive into a deeper nature of existence. And then more things became revealed that weren't quite in coherence, that weren't quite in alignment. I mean, if almost everything that we have constructed around ourselves, or everything that we have come to believe, is then shown to us to not be 100% accurate, then it can be a big paradigm shift. And it can bring up a lot of questioning, more questions than answers, certainly in the beginning. It's okay, what do I do about this? Like, I didn't see the world that way before, but now I see the world that way. In the same way with music, if somebody goes to a retreat or to a ceremony and they hear a certain type of music they've never heard before, all of their life they listen to one kind of music, or let's say the last couple of years, they listen to it, they're at home with their family, they listen to this kind of music every day, they eat this kind of food, they have a certain routine and a structure, which is a holding pattern. And then they go away to a retreat, maybe they want to have some healing, or they want to have an experience of this, and they go back and they no longer want to listen to the same music. It doesn't feel right to them. They come back listening to a completely different form of music. And then they bring that to the family and say, oh, we've never heard this before. What happened to you? And then it's like, oh, maybe we don't want to eat this kind of food anymore. And he's like, what happened to you? Maybe I don't want to do my job anymore. What happened to you? Oh, everything's falling apart for you. It's a big change, not just for the person that might experience this, but it's a big change for the people around them as well. And what we notice with change is that it can challenge a lot of the pre-existing norms. So it's to be careful, to be well supported in the outside world, to be well resourced on the internal world to the best as possible, and to accept that there may be a certain amount of adjustment time. Again, if somebody wishes to start to experience this path, then again to research a little bit, to research as to how, where, again into legalities, into which environment to place oneself into. We're essentially placing our physical, psychological, emotional, mental well-being into a certain space. So we want to make sure that it's the best one for us. There are many ways of doing this kind of thing, so the best way would be to ultimately to be recommended.
I see. And did you experience that?
Absolutely, yeah. I found myself almost immediately incorporating other forms of music that I wouldn't previously have done. And so sometimes I did think to myself, what am I doing? I almost immediately found a lifestyle shift in terms of what I ate, how I related. I found myself locating geographically to support my next step in my life. And luckily I was able to do that. I had a lot of options in front of me at the time, and to try to reconcile many of the areas of the existence that needed to be reconciled. So there was a big shift for me, and I recognized that I was fortunate in that to be able to make it. And I recognized that for some it can be a big challenge also.
Is that the reason why you decided to live in Peru?
It was one of my inspirations to live in Peru was definitely to be close to sources of this ancestral wisdom. Is to be directly connected with the source. If I wanted to spend time with a man that became my teacher, then the easiest thing for me to do, he couldn't, he lived the way he lived. I would see him very rarely if I didn't live there. So in order to really immerse in this, it was necessary for me to relocate.
I want to ask you about, I'm going to look into questions that I've prepared. I want to ask you, music plays a fundamental role in many healing ceremonies. What role does music play in integrating experiences with medicine like ayahuasca?
Mm-hmm. Well, here we follow on from the same topic. What we might hear in a ceremonial setting is potentially very inspirational to us. It's also vibrational. So in terms of integrating, then maybe we can listen to that afterwards. We want to, maybe we don't want to forget the message of the medicine so quickly, or the message that we heard while in the experience, which is often channeled through the music. For the majority of people that I would know that would be consider themselves to be medicine musicians or in this kind of field, it's a fine distinction between where the music comes from for them. The inspiration is coming maybe from working with the plants, so therefore the message of the music is in coherence with the message of the plants. So coming out of that, it's not so easy to just turn on the radio and listen to the same songs the radio has been playing for the last 30 years, is how do we continue to remember? The process of remembering comes, and the music can play a really good part in that. And there are, many, many artists out there now in the field of medicine music that we can listen to and gain inspiration from.
If you go to the ceremony, what happens? Yes, as time goes by, you tend to forget the things that were shown to you or the way that you felt during the ceremony. So music is a way to preserve that connection to the plant and to whatever you explore during the ceremony. Because I listen to music, I have to be honest, but I listen to all kinds of music. I don't necessarily put on my phone or Musica Medicina, I'm just going to say in Spanish, Musica Medicina all the time. And I do feel the change when I put it on, but I had never thought about it this way, as to preserve and to remember the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't listen to medicine music all of the time, but to be honest, I don't listen to much of it. But your question was about integrating, and integrating is the process of bringing what took place at the ceremony or the retreat or whatever into the life. So again, bringing a memory of that, integration can take many, many forms for many people, but the process of remembering is highly important if we're going to be able to integrate. We can trust that a part of it is going to naturally integrate, but then we have to do some work. We might have to journal, we might have to listen to music, we might play music to integrate. We might want to find our inspiration in these ways, but if we don't remember, then we find it very easy to pass from one experience to the next and miss out the point in between, which is bringing it into the daily life. And if we don't bring it into the daily life, then we're not integrating it. So we're going from experience to experience to experience. And this is the pattern in the modern world, is to search for a peak experience or any experience, usually one that makes us feel good, and then consume it, say thank you very much, forget about it, and look for the next experience. So in order to integrate and to make the most of the experience that we've had, especially with ancestral medicines, ancestral plants, the real onus is to be in a process in which we can integrate it. It's not to take for granted. They call it a blessing when one of these plants crosses your path even once. So if we are operating from a consumer mentality in which we can have the experience and we have the luxury to forget it and to go for another one, then are we truly honoring what we've just been through? Are we truly honoring the spirit of this plant for what is the great fortune for crossing paths with it, for what is gifted to us? Like your podcast is the gift of this life. Or if the gifts are all around us, but if we forget to pick them up, or if we pick them up, play with them for a few minutes like a child, put it down, wait for the next one, then are we truly appreciating the gift for any period of time, or just operating in an inherently ungrateful way? So integration is key, and really to be connecting again with that essence. Music has a fantastic capacity for that. I would love to believe that the music that is made in the sphere of medicine music has that ability to connect with that essence. And I know that the one or two artists in the medicine music field that I do listen to, I feel that when I listen to their music, it brings me back to, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be living a life that is built upon a certain way of being. It helps me to not be distracted in the great big world of distraction.
So we look for the instant gratification, even while working with the medicinal plants. It could be, right?
It could be, because it's hardwired into the system by now. It's a way of existing in the world which has been ingrained. It's ingrained into our way of thinking. It's ingrained into our way of operating. And the process of rewiring that, it doesn't take a day.
So part of the integration, besides the music, is there something you'd suggest for someone who has been working with the medicine and perhaps is doing the pattern of, like myself, I go and then I stop for a few months and then I go back and then I stop? And I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not integrating, but it does feel sometimes, I have to be honest, it feels like if I forget a little bit.
So the question was?
What else would you suggest besides the music to integrating after a ceremony?
Well, I said writing is key for me. Giving some time and some space. Giving some time and space to remembering the experience, to remembering what the lessons were, trying to break it down into the key points. A lot of the sensations or the ways of dealing with things, the ways that we understand, applicable in the daily life. The reframing of a point of view or a perspective. But again, this requires a bit of time and attention. I recommend people connect with the ceremony, they connect with the plants in the daily life also. We don't have to go to the ceremony in order to connect with the plant. Once we've connected with the plant in that way, then we have that access point open to us again, so we can bring it into meditations, we can bring it into our field of being a little bit more. Connecting with nature, this is a very strong one, because it helps us to drop into a different rhythm. You say about how easy it is to forget. Well, yes, look at the way that we live our lives. We live our lives in a very full way these days. And often there's a bit of a disconnect between how we live, and we don't necessarily have so much contact with the natural world. But yet, when we drop into that frequency of the natural world, then we drop into the holding of the natural world, and that brings the order into a slightly different balance.
Yeah. And how about ícaros? Can you explain to the audience what are ícaros and how do they play a role?
I don't have all of the answers to that question.
But you play ícaros, right? Am I correct?
I carry some ícaros, yes.
Okay.
And I'm familiar with the way of working with ícaros from one aspect. I can't speak for anybody else. The way it was understood for me is that ícaros are songs generally with or without maraca, sonacas, rattles, or chacapas, with or without, depending on the tradition. So traditional songs of ayahuasca, which are given to the person holding the ceremony, the maestro, usually by the plants, by the processes of dietas to be able to open up certain spaces with the medicine to sing for different things. For people could say spirits, with intention, with focus. I mean, the way that we can really break it down to the base is they're there to help to guide the ceremony. The plant medicine responds in a certain way to ícaros, but they are also a point to help to channel the focus. We don't just sing. When ícaros are brought to the space, say my dear teacher Don Javier, he works exclusively with ícaros and healing. When ícaros are brought to the space, they're considered to be medicine in their own right. Each ícaro is its own medicine. And he's there to channel the vibration, the healing energy to where it's needed to go. It's considered to be an entire science. The whole science of working with this plant, ayahuasca, in this way is considered to be a science. And the ícaros are one of the technologies of the science. And there's a very ancient technology. I suspect it's been there pretty much since the origin. And they work in many different ways because it's like a mantra, let's say. A mantra works on one level, which would be the words of the mantra. They have a certain meaning. Whether you know them or not, they have a certain vibration, certain energy to them. Then there's the melody, and there would be the rhythm. And obviously when you know the meaning of it, and it works in a slightly deeper way, they're considered to be pure medicine.
So when you mentioned that your maestro, he channels, when you play an ícaro, what's the role of the facilitator, of the person who's creating the music? Is it acting as a channel to imprint a certain frequency in the whole ceremony? Or I don't know, is he, because I know that the plant is also working through him as he's part of the ceremony.
I can't say to say, I can't exactly say yes or no for anybody else.
What do you feel?
Well, let's get away from this word channel in the traditional context. Not the traditional, the modern context is where it's being used. When we say channel, we think it's kind of whatever's coming through is coming through. Mm-hmm. This is often not the way with ícaros. This is not, in my understanding of it, it's not necessarily the way. Ícaros have form, structure, which is given, maybe channeled originally to the maestro, and then retained by the maestro, and then learned by the maestro, and then brought to the ceremony by the maestro. Now, he's not in the ceremony just channeling whatever comes through out into the space. That might be for some, I don't know. I simply don't know that. I would say the channel would be to remain objective, right? To remain focused on why this is being brought through, and that it's brought through in the most pure way possible, that all of the medicine of it and behind it is coming through. So yes, to be a clean channel for this to come through, but knowing what's coming through, if you understand.
I think I understand better this time. Yeah, thank you. I would like to talk to you about creativity. Creativity can be a profound channel. Going again, mira, look, coming back to the channel. Can be a profound channel for spiritual expression. How do you feel that the music you create with Misk'i Taki connects you to your purest form of creativity? You mentioned something about this being a character. Do you believe that when you become this character, there is a certain creativity that comes along with it?
I don't believe I become this character.
Okay.
No, this is not something I put a hat on and suddenly become Misk'i Taki. This is, it's just an aspect. It's a name. It's something that I don't necessarily identify with, not identify with. For me, music is what I love to create. When I experience something inside of myself, I often find that I wish to bring it out from the inside to the outside. What am I bringing apart from my understanding or my essence? It enables me to translate something into something else. It's speaking a different language. So this is for me is how the creativity can be used. But the creativity is not simply, creating music. We're talking about music here. But in order to create music, we need to translate an experience into words, or a sensation, or an emotion, or feeling into words. We need to bring the appropriate music to it as well to be able to be in harmony, to be in resonance. And as with all things, I think the clearer the channel that we can be, as in terms of the more we can be objective, then we're able to bring more of our truest self or our inspiration from the inside to the outside. So it's a very... Creativity in terms of me for music is very hard to even begin to understand. Where does it come from? Does it come from inside? Does it come from the 25th dimension? Does it come from my higher self? Does it come from what I've learned along the way? It's almost like all of this comes into one place. Not all of it, maybe not the 25th dimension, but it all comes into one place. It goes into a process, and then eventually comes out if it's given the time, the space, and every song would be its own independent creation, and then it has its own life, it has its own energy, and usually is something that has been meaningful to me or medicine for me. Most of the songs that I've written have been for me. Something I've learned, something I've needed to learn, something I've needed to translate in the field of human experience into something that I can then understand and then pass. Some have been created for other people. Usually the process of creation is very organic. It simply is more of a process of allowing and then constructing, deconstructing, allowing. So how does it connect to the most pure form? I think it connects to the more pure form through the body, through the heart, through the mind. It's body, mind, and heart all working together to create something new.
When you're in your creative process, you mentioned that it becomes organic. But for that to happen organically, is there a ritual? Is it spontaneous? How does it work for you? Is it something that you have to be devoted to?
Yes. Yeah, for me, I require discipline. Otherwise, I'll never sit down for long enough to finish something. Is one thing I learned a long time ago, that to be creative mentally doesn't bring the creations into action. You can think about something in a very creative way for a very long time, and we can not finish projects. So again, it requires discipline to be able to finish the project. It helps to connect with creativity first, and there are many ways that people can do that. For me, the easiest way to do it is to get out of my head. And again, that's where nature plays a big part for me. Quite often when I'm walking, when I'm driving, when I'm not thinking of something, then something will open up, and that process will say, hey, listen, there's something here. Let's explore it. But then it takes a fair amount of discipline to construct the time and the space to be able to sit down with the instrument long enough to, people say, what comes first, the words or the music? It depends on which environment I'm in, things like this. But what we can circle back to is that one of the benefits that I've noticed in my life and in the lives of many people who have experienced what we know as ancestral medicines or sacred plants is that they start to connect with their essence. They start to connect with something that is authentic and true for them. Another process that can often happen is our process of creativity is awakened. And then we start to explore our creativity and how that can manifest. And for some it might be through music, for some it might be through cooking, for some it might be through painting, ways of thinking. So many different ways to be creative. Making a podcast, is what is the channel that we can say yes to? What is the one that's more appropriate for us? I understand or have understood or maybe was taught to understand the language of music and other things. So maybe that's the way that comes through for me, and other people is other ways. But I would probably suggest that for most people it requires a certain amount of dedication, a certain amount of discipline to actually do something. I remember reading years ago, one of my favorite authors, their advice to anybody that wanted to be an author or a writer was just do it. Every day, sit down for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it was and write some pages, even if you didn't know what you were going to write, just to get the muscle memory going, get the practice in. Without practice, we're not going to be able to start to make progress. And without the progress and the practice, we're not going to start to become more adept at what we're trying to do. None of us starts off from perfection. We have to get rid of that idea right from the beginning, recognize that, it's a long process.
Yeah. Yeah, you just answered the questions that I had, because I am in the process of writing my book, and I have a hard time even saying to myself, oh yes, I'm a writer, because I don't have anything published and I'm just putting in the work right now. So for you, was it when you started to play music and connect with the music and have another part of yourself or connecting more to your essence while playing music, did it come to a point where you truly identified yourself as a musician? Or because I'm sure that many people who are watching this, they have a dream and they have to become a channel or they want to bring their essence through a creative form. But I at least have a hard time saying to people, oh yes, I'm a podcaster or I'm a writer. And it's challenging. And I want to embrace that part of myself as I'm sure that other people want to embrace those other aspects of themselves. So how was that for you?
Well, let's embrace this concept of being a channel. I think we kind of moved away from it a little bit because channeling has a certain connotation. Let's embrace it in the term that in so many traditions, especially the Celtic tradition of my ancestry, there's the concept of being a hollow bone, which is to allow spirit or inspiration or to receive information, who knows, right, to pass through us. So without obstruction of our belief systems or what our society has said or appropriate or inappropriate values, things like this. Let's go to the concept of the hollow bone. And what are we? Are we defined by what we do? Right. In many aspects of modern society, we are defined by what we do. This definition comes with a certain amount of validation and success stories or failure stories. You are instantly putting yourself out there to be judged, theoretically, in the way that modern society is constructed. So So you tell someone, I'm a writer. Oh yeah, what have you written? Well,
exactly. Yeah.
I've written quite a lot, really. I wrote a shopping list yesterday. Oh yeah, and how many people have read it? Me, Does it mean that you're not a writer? No. Do you enjoy writing? Yes. Therefore, you could define yourself as a writer. You could define yourself as somebody that loves to write. But again, does you being a writer, or you being a podcaster, or you being a musician, does it have to be equated with how many people listen to you? How famous you are, how much money you make? We don't have the same kind of thing when somebody says, "What do you do?" I'm a mid-level manager. Do people come into any judgments about that? But in the artistic fields is definitely a certain amount of evaluation going on, because it's maybe harder to understand, because we live in a society that's very based upon success or value or things like this. So in terms of being a musician, music was always part of my life. I didn't define myself as a musician. I still don't define myself as a musician. I think it was very useful to me at a certain time when somebody who was a phenomenal musician came up to me and said, "I really enjoyed your song." And I bounced off his compliment. Okay. He said, no, look at me. He said, "Coming from a very good musician, I would like to let you know that you're a very good musician." And it really sunk in that I hadn't accepted that was a truth in that moment. I don't like to become inflated and think, "Oh, I'm a great musician." I'm not a great guitar player. I'm not necessarily the world's greatest singer, but I do it for me. And if one person appreciates it or receives some benefit from listening to it, then that's enough for me. You have to. For me, there was a very clear moment when I had to let go of the need to be. It's like I said back in my 20s, when I realized I wasn't going to be famous. I wasn't going to be the next, multi-millions selling, rock musician. And I realized that wasn't what I was doing it for anyway. In terms of being a writer, I love to write. I didn't expect to be read by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And that did or didn't come true, so it's a process of the validation. My internal clock is not based to what other people define me by. And again, I don't define myself by the limitations of being a musician and not being something else. If I feel like I'm creative, then I can expand that out into all aspects of my life. But certainly it's a very interesting conundrum to come in front of people and to say, you might be a podcaster. There are podcasters in the world who some have one person watching their podcast. Some have tens of millions, maybe more, watching their podcasts. But they're still a podcaster. So then it comes into how successful is a podcaster. What do you define by success? Am I defined by it has to be 10 million people? Or am I defined by the success that I enjoy what I do? It gets out there to the world, and some people appreciate it. Like, we live in a very global world these days where it's all about the numbers. It's all about how far our reach is. Can we impact our own life in a positive way? Does it bring value and positive impact into our home environment, into our immediate community? This is the way things spread out. It's not about having a great global reach. For me, is everything being back to front. You want to be successful in a global way because you're interested in the fame. But what about the genuine human touch? Right? What about could you be just as happy without the fame? Like, doing it for the love of doing it and for the pure pleasure and the gift of being able to express in this way and to reach and to touch another person in this way. This is the human connection, which is, again, forgotten about in the great global race to become something.
Yeah, I think I shared with you when we talked before the interview. I shared with you the book from Julia Cameron that is called The Artist's Way, and in the last week that I read, it was about the fame, how it's detrimental for the creative soul, because it's looking for the validation, and that it might be not saying it exactly how she wrote it, but how that blockage creates a blockage also in the creative aspects of ourselves, and competition as well. And nowadays with social media and all the pressure to produce and create and putting out the work as fast as you can, or as consistently as you can, for you, how does a new way of being a creator, and so does that have an impact on you, or have you been able to keep it on the just not part of your creative process?
I think the great, it's not to say fame's not a great motivator. It's not to say that it's not to be detrimental to anybody that does achieve some level of, but fame in itself it comes with there's a great trap attached to it, which is arrogance. The modern world, as far as I understand it, is very different from the world in which I grew up in. When I think about the music that inspired me when I was young, maybe these people weren't necessarily role models, weren't healthy role models. But the way of listening to music was different. In the global reach was not so large. To become famous, to become successful, I'm not sure if it was easier, more difficult, but it didn't seem like everybody was trying to do it. Now it seems like everybody's trying to do it. And everybody is also finding their voice, is trying to find something to say. Now they tell me that there are jobs that are around that are not jobs that were ever there in history before. I'm an influencer. I'm a trendsetter. That's a job? Wow. Never realized that. When I was studying in school, that wasn't something you could study to be a trendsetter or an influencer or a celebrity. Celebrity wasn't an option, but I'm sure there's a lot of people in the world that wish to be a celebrity. I'm not quite sure why. But quite often cases, these are people that are becoming famous for not just for the sake of being famous. They're not even necessarily famous for anything they've done or who they are. Or if they are, it's not who they really are. It's an identity. In the field of music, when I would get a cassette tape or when I would get a CD or a record, what we call vinyl these days, it would be a cherished thing. I get I get it. I could hold it. It was tangible. I could touch it. I could open it up. I could feel it. I could look at the artwork on the front. I could open it up, read all of the lyrics. I could read where it was recorded. I could read who it was dedicated to. Same way you would with a book, many ways these days. And that would become a big feature of my life for weeks, months, potentially years. This CD or this tape wouldn't really leave my CD player or tape deck for weeks. I'd listen to it in sequence, song after song after song, as it was intended to be recorded. Or was intended when it was recorded. And nowadays we are in a big consumer world. The people would tell you that people don't buy music anymore. People would tell you that people don't listen to albums anymore. So when I was considering recording this new album I could just go the way that everybody is saying is the more successful way for gaining more listeners, which is to put out a song every month. But that's not what I wanted to do. I don't want to be influenced by a trend. I recommend to everybody that bought this album, thankfully some people did still, and everybody that listens to it, to listen to it from front to back, from the first song to the last. It's designed to be that way. Every song stands alone in its own right, but together they form a cohesive unit. And I know that this requires somebody sitting down and taking an hour to listen. It doesn't necessarily happen so much these days. Is very much, we listen to one song, jump to the next artist, jump to the next artist, jump to the next artist. Sometimes we don't even choose what we're going to listen to because we have platforms like Spotify choosing the next song for us. There are algorithms that you listen to that, so we think we're going to like that. You're going to like that. How could they even think for that for some of these things? So is a skill. It's an art to listen. Like, number one, like music requires somebody. It requires somebody to make the music and somebody to listen to it. So again, like it's very easy to fall into the trap of what are the current trends and themes. It also requires, if you want to build your audience and things like this, there are many tools even on Spotify for helping artists to do this, but they all generally center around creating your brand, selling yourself, like letting people know constantly that they don't forget about your existence. It's like, and if everybody's trying to do that, we can just get really confused by constant media stimulation, news feeds, and again, building up a persona that is Misk'i Taki. That would become a full-time job to be a certain person and have a full-time obligation to not become that particular character. That's one aspect of the being. It's not the whole thing. So it's a fine dance.
We've covered a lot of things that I had prepared, and I just want you to share with us. Well, let's just ask this one more last question. The world is going through a time of great transformation. How do you think ancestral music and traditional medicines can help heal or guide people during this era?
Well, through the connection with the natural world, through the connection with the ancestral medicines or some of the sacred plants, some of these traditions that have been in existence for thousands of years, recognized for thousands of years. There's the capacity to enter into a recognition of the importance of being here now, being present in our lives and in good connection with our own nature, with nature around us. We find in many areas that we're disconnected from nature, from our own essence, from our own inherent divinity, but also there's, you say, it's an important and transformational time on the planet. Well, isn't it always, is the question. Is it always? Right now there seems to be more onus because actually we're feeling it, because it's upon us to look to the continuity of life. I am positive that life will continue, but the quality of life continuing is something that we have to look forward to. There comes a time when it stops to be about us, and we recognize that this is a passage of time. We inherit this from this gift of life from our ancestors, and we have an obligation to pass it down in the best way possible to those that are coming after us. Comparatively speaking, our lifetimes are generous compared to other species. We have, our limited time on this earth. And in the grand scheme of things, it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny link in a chain. This is only thinking of our species, but in terms of the whole of the planet's evolution, we're literally a blink of an eye. So it gives perspective. Some of the plant medicines and some of the work like this can help to put that into perspective. Help to reconnect with the natural essence, the natural order of things, to help to see, you said about healing. So a lot of the time the healing is recognizing what is out of balance, the way in which we think, the way in which we live, the way in which we cohabit with all of the other species, the other forms of life on this planet. For a little bit of time, there's been a kind of domination of thought that says that it's all about us. And I think that working with plant medicines help us to see that it's really not all about us. And hopefully this has a positive impact for how we show up, how we take responsibility, how we're able to teach, our children and our children's children about who they are, where they come from, what they're here to do, and what they're going to leave behind after them. We all have that responsibility to live with and to choose to take or to not. But for the benefit of the whole, then this kind of work, this kind of healing work, this kind of looking into our nature, then allows us to potentially make the difference that we need to make on this planet, to bring ourselves more fully to this planet. One of the words for life is incarnation, to bring something into the flesh. What into the flesh? To bring what we define as spirit or this into the body. So we live in a coherent way with that, in recognition that this is our birthright, to live in the gift, shall we say. With appreciation for what is, because appreciation for what is, as you know, it naturally fosters the state of abundance. It says, I am happy, I am safe, I am secure, and I have more than enough. And this is a reorientation. This is the foundation of bringing it in to say, well, what do I really need? And consequently, it helps you to attract what it is that is necessary for you. If you live in that state, then it's far easier to receive and far easier to give, because then you become that channel again. If you're always in a state of ingratitude or ungratefulness, or you don't have enough mentally, then you need to take from the outside. It's a reorientation. Plant medicines help a lot with this, reorienting to an interior world that's coming to the outside rather than consuming from the outside to fill something on the inside. So when we say healing, it's like breaking down the parts that are blocked off, that allow the creativity, that allow the inspiration, allow the spark of life to rise to the surface and to be seen, to be shared. It doesn't require everybody in the world to go out and drink plant medicine or take part in a ceremony. What it could be is the like we said about integration, that person that has experienced it, to open that channel within themselves, which then helps to open a channel in another person. It doesn't mean they have to go and do it. It means that we can bring it into the life, and in the way that we relate with people, in the way that we relate with existence, then we're naturally changing a vibration around ourselves, and that naturally reorders things in our own world. And then, so this is the possibility of so many different people are coming to plant medicines and to ceremonial work, and have the potential to uplift what has become rather dense energy on the planet, dense ways of thinking, dense ways of being. Like you said earlier, in competition rather than celebration. Like, do I need you to fail for me to succeed? Or can I be very happy for your success and not need to own it as well, not need to take possession of it, like to celebrate another person's existence? Can I bless myself and can I bless another person at the same time? Can we end a story which is based upon us and them? And we see it with what we do with our celebrities, what we do with our famous people. We love to build them up and build them up and build them up, and then suddenly cut them down. Why do we need to do that? Have we not learned anything in human history? Do we have great things ahead of us on the planet in so many ways, but also we have great challenge. So again, are we going to rise to that challenge independently, or are we going to rise to that challenge together? We're in it together, whether we like it or not. So we better like it, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for what you shared. It really touched me. And I think we've covered a lot of topics. And if you would like to share just a final message for the people who are connecting with themselves, or maybe with the plant medicines or Musica Medicina as well, just a final message before we finish the conversation.
The final message, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for having me here. It's been a pleasure to share. I wish everybody a good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good life. And thank you for the opportunity to hear that this podcast is called The Gift of the Life.
Thank you so much, Gareth. And I'm going to add the information about you and how they can listen your music because it's just beautiful. And thank you again. Muchas gracias por venir. Thank you. Bye.